Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the chosen heir of Odin's Stormbreaker. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air at Dagobah Municipal Beach Park was a thick cocktail of salt, decay, and failure. It clung to the back of Izuku Midoriya's throat, a taste as bitter as the words echoing in his soul. He sat on a rusted, disemboweled washing machine, its metal skeleton a stark monument in the moonlight. The waves, sluggish and heavy with plastic refuse, lapped listlessly at the shore, a tired sigh from a polluted world. This place, a graveyard of forgotten things, felt like the only fitting location for the burial of a dream. It's not bad to dream, but you need to be realistic. The voice of All Might, his idol, the #1 hero, the symbol of everything he had ever wanted to be, was a relentless phantom. It wasn't cruel. That was the worst part. It was kind, regretful, and utterly final. It was the sound of a god gently closing the gates to heaven. Izuku's hands, trembling, clutched at his hero analysis for the future number 13. The cover was still slightly warped, the edges singed black from Kaken's earlier explosion. He ran a thumb over the charred paper, the texture of phantom pain mirroring the scorch marks on his heart. For 10 years, these notebooks had been his life. His quirk, his frantic, desperate attempt to bridge the genetic chasm that separated him from everyone else. He had poured every ounce of his intelligence, his passion, his very being into these pages. He had analyzed heroes, memorized their moves, theorized their weaknesses and strengths, all in the hope that knowledge could be a substitute for power. All Might's words had proven him wrong. Knowledge without power was just a collection of useless facts. A fanless obsession. A choked sob escaped his lips, sharp and ugly in the quiet night. He hunched over, wrapping his arms around his stomach as if to hold himself together. The tears came hot and fast, tracing clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. He cried for the little boy in the All Might onesie, for the years of taunts and jeers, for the pitying looks from his teachers, for the constant, aching worry in his mother's eyes. He cried for the hope that had died on that rooftop just a few hours ago. His gaze fell upon the notebook in his hands. It felt impossibly heavy, a tome filled with dead words and childish fantasies. With a surge of self-loathing, he drew his arm back, his knuckles white. He would throw it into the ocean. Let it be swallowed by the trash, just like his dream. Let it dissolve into nothing. His arm locked, muscles screaming with the intent. But he couldn't. Even now, even at the absolute nadir of his existence, a part of him refused to let go. The same stubborn, foolish part that had made him rush towards the sludge villain. The part that still, stupidly, wanted to be a hero. His arm fell limply to his side, the notebook thudding softly against the sand. He was pathetic. He couldn't even give up properly. He tilted his head back, staring at the vast, indifferent sky. The stars were faint, washed out by the perpetual glow of the city, but they were there. Countless points of light, each a sun, each a world, utterly oblivious to the small, broken boy on a trash-covered beach. He felt a profound sense of cosmic loneliness. In a world of quirks, of heroes and villains, of grand destinies, he was a statistical error. A blank page in a world full of epic poems. Why? He whispered to the uncaring void. Why me? The void, it seemed, decided to answer. It started not as a sight, but as a sound. A low, ethereal hum that seemed to vibrate in the bones of the earth. It was a chord, both beautiful and dissonant, that cut through the mundane drone of the city. Izuku sat up straight, wiping his eyes, his analytical mind kicking in despite his despair. An engine? Some new kind of aircraft? Then he saw it, a tear in the fabric of the night sky. A brilliant pinprick of light that wasn't a star. It grew brighter, swelling with impossible speed, and the hum intensified into a deafening, celestial scream. It wasn't the white-hot streak of a typical meteor. This was a falling rainbow. Shards of emerald, sapphire, ruby, and gold light bled from its core, painting the clouds in hues they were never meant to wear. It was terrifyingly beautiful, a piece of impossible celestial art plummeting towards the earth. Izuku's jaw went slack. The sight was so overwhelming, so alien, that it momentarily blasted away his grief, replacing it with pure, unadulterated awe. He stood up, stumbling back from the shoreline as the object descended. It was heading for the ocean, right off the coast from his position. The world seemed to hold its breath. The rainbow comet screamed past, the air around it crackling with an energy that made the hair on Izuku's arms stand on end. Then came the impact. It didn't make the sound of a rock hitting water. It was the sound of a god striking a cosmic anvil. A deep, resonant boom that was felt more than heard, a shockwave of pure force that slammed into the beach. A mountain of water and garbage erupted from the ocean, a grotesque tsunami of sludge and brine. Izuku threw his arms up to shield his face as the wave crashed over the shore, drenching him in filthy, freezing water and pelting him with sand and plastic debris. The roar of the impact faded, replaced by the hiss of steam and the groaning of displaced metal. The beach was a war zone. The tide of trash had been churned and rearranged, forming new, jagged hills of refuse. A thick, otherworldly mist, smelling of ozone and something else, something ancient, like thunderstorms and old stone, rose from the impact point just beyond the breakers. For a moment, Izuku was frozen, his body shaking from adrenaline and cold. His mind, trained for years to analyze crisis situations, took over. Crash. Unknown object. Potential for hazardous materials. Possible injuries. Is anyone hurt? The thought was instinctual, a fundamental part of his being that no amount of despair could erase. There were often homeless people who sought shelter among the larger piles of debris. Fishermen sometimes cast lines from the jetties, even at this hour. Someone could have been caught in the blast. His own safety was an afterthought. His shattered dream was forgotten. Someone might need help. Hello? He shouted, his voice hoarse. Is anybody out there? Are you okay? Only the gurgle of the receding water answered. He had to check. He had to be sure. His legs moved before he made a conscious decision, propelling him forward into the chaos. He scrambled over mountains of slick garbage bags and treacherous piles of scrap metal, his sneakers slipping on the wet, sandy ground. The mist grew thicker as he neared the water's edge, glowing with a soft, residual inner light. It swirled around his knees, cool and strangely invigorating. He reached the epicenter of the disturbance. The water was unnaturally calm here, a perfect circle of placid sea in the midst of the churning tide. At its center was a newly formed sandbar, a small island of wreckage and dredged-up ocean floor created by the force of the impact. And on that island, something was wedged into a tangled mess of steel rebar and a half-buried engine block. It was not a meteor. Meteors are rocks. They are pitted, charred, and lifeless. This was something else entirely. It was an axe, a weapon of impossible design, a fusion of brutal lethality and breathtaking artistry. The head was forged from a metal so dark it seemed to drink the moonlight. It wasn't black, but the color of a starless midnight sky, with faint, swirling nebulae of a deeper gray trapped within its surface. One side was a heavy, cleaver-like blade, its edge impossibly sharp even from this distance. The other was a blunt, powerful hammerhead, inscribed with spiraling, intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in the ethereal mist. The handle was just as strange. It wasn't metal or polished wood. It looked alive. It was made of gnarled, intertwining branches of a dark, root-like wood that grew up and wrapped around the Uru head as if it were a natural part of it. It looked ancient, powerful, and utterly out of place in a world of chrome and plastic. Izuku stopped, his breath catching in his chest. He was no longer a hero in training or a quirkless failure. He was just a boy standing before a relic from a forgotten age, a piece of a myth that had fallen into his world. A low hum emanated from the axe, the same celestial chord he'd heard before, but softer now, a deep thrumming that resonated in his very marrow. It wasn't a sound that traveled through the air to his ears. It was a vibration he felt in his soul. It pulsed with a patient, waiting power, like a sleeping dragon. The air around it was heavy, charged with an energy that made his teeth ache. He waded through the shallow water, his steps slow and deliberate. The world outside this small circle of mist and metal seemed to fade away. The sounds of the city, the waves, his own frantic heartbeat, all of it receded into a dull, distant roar. There was only the axe and the silence it commanded. As he drew closer, a new sensation began to creep into his mind. It wasn't a voice. It was feeling. Pure, unfiltered concepts that bloomed in his consciousness like ink dropped in water. Loneliness. A vast, kingly solitude. The weight of 1,000 years spent on a silent throne, watching the universe turn. The ache of seeing everyone you love turn to dust while you remain. Duty. An unbreakable, unyielding sense of responsibility. The burden of an entire realm, a whole people, resting on one set of shoulders. A promise made to the past and the future. Sacrifice. A flash of blinding pain in his right eye. The feeling of giving up a part of yourself for a greater knowledge, a greater good. The cold finality of offering one's own life to protect what matters. Protection. A fierce, primal instinct. The roar of a father defending his children. The image of a shield wall holding against an unstoppable tide. The unwavering will to stand between the innocent and the abyss. Izuku stumbled to a halt just a few feet from the axe. His head was swimming with these alien emotions, these echoes of a life he had never lived. They were overwhelming yet familiar. They were the grandiose, mythological versions of the same feelings that had driven him his entire life. The loneliness of being quirkless. The self-imposed duty to understand heroes. The willingness to sacrifice his own body to save Kaken. The desperate, burning need to protect people with a smile. And then, the final, most powerful whisper of all. A question that wasn't a question, but a standard. A measure. Worthiness. He stood before the axe, dripping, shivering, and covered in filth. A 15-year-old boy with no power, no prospects, and a dream that had been pronounced dead. By all logic, he should have been terrified. He should have run, called the police, called a pro-hero. This was beyond him, beyond anyone, but he wasn't afraid. He felt a pull, a sense of belonging that defied all reason. This silent, powerful thing understood him. It had felt the echoes of his own heart across an ocean of stars and answered. Slowly, as if in a trance, he raised his right hand. It was shaking violently, not from fear, but from a profound, terrifying anticipation. The whispers grew stronger, swirling around him, inviting him. He saw them now not just as feelings, but as fragmented images superimposed over the misty beach. A great, one-eyed king sitting on a golden throne, his face a mask of sorrow and grim resolve. A magnificent bridge made of pure, solid rainbow, shattering into 1 billion motes of light. A monstrous wolf, the size of a mountain, its fur the color of the void, breaking ethereal chains as its howl shook the foundations of reality. He saw the old king, weary and faded, standing before the axe. He laid his hands upon it, his own life force, golden and brilliant, pouring into the dark metal and the living wood. And Izuku heard a voice, ancient and thundering, echoing not in the air, but in the annals of time itself. Whosoever holds this axe, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of a king. The final vision was of the axe itself, wrapped in the last of the king's magic, hurled into a vortex of cosmic light. It flew through shimmering tunnels of energy, past blazing nebulae and dying suns, a desperate message in a bottle thrown into the sea of infinity. It was searching, hunting, not for the strongest, or the fastest, or the most powerful. It was searching for a hero's heart. Izuku's fingers were now just an inch from the gnarled, wooden handle. The space between his skin and the axe crackled with contained power. He knew, with a certainty that transcended thought, that touching it would change everything. There would be no going back. The life of Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless wannabe, would end here, on this beach. He thought of All Might's face, etched with pity. He thought of Kaken's sneer. He thought of his mother's tears. He thought of the look of terror in a victim's eyes, and the triumphant smile of a hero who had saved them. He closed the final inch. The moment his skin made contact with the wood, the universe screamed. It was not a surge of power. It was a detonation. A dam of cosmic energy, held back for eons, bursting forth and flooding the empty vessel that was Izuku Midoriya. Every cell in his body ignited. His nervous system became a conduit for raw lightning. His blood boiled and froze in the same instant. He felt the birth of stars and the death of galaxies race through his mind in a single, terrifying second. His own scream was lost in the sudden, violent roar of the world itself. The sky above Dagoba Beach, which had been clear just moments before, was now a roiling cauldron of black and gray clouds. They converged directly above him, spinning into a vortex of impossible speed. The calm eye of the storm was centered on him, and the axe. Crack-kaboom! A bolt of lightning, thick as a skyscraper and blindingly blue, erupted not from the clouds down, but from the axe up. It struck the heart of the storm, and the sky answered with a deafening peal of thunder that sounded like the heavens themselves were splitting apart. The ground shook. Windows rattled for miles around. Izuku was on his knees, his hand fused to the axe's handle. He couldn't let go. He didn't want to. The power was agony, but it was a glorious, purposeful agony. It was scouring the weakness from his bones, reforging him in celestial fire. He tilted his head back, his mouth open in a silent scream, and his eyes, his wide green, tear-filled eyes, were no longer green. They blazed with the pure, untamable blue-white light of a captive star. The storm raged. Wind howled, whipping the trash and sand into a furious cyclone around him. Rain fell in thick, horizontal sheets, but not a single drop touched the circle of land where he knelt. He was the calm at the center of a hurricane he had created. He could feel it all. Every molecule of water in the air. The static charge building in the clouds. The electromagnetic field of the planet itself. It was a symphony of cosmic forces, and for the first time, he was not just a listener. He was the conductor. He lifted the axe. It felt as if he were lifting a mountain, yet it also felt as light as a part of his own arm. The moment it cleared the wreckage, the humming intensified, the spiraling runes on the hammerhead glowing with the same brilliant blue as his eyes. He held it aloft, a primal, instinctual pose he had never been taught, a posture of kings and gods. The visions returned, no longer fragmented whispers but a coherent, brutal flood. He saw the golden city of Asgard, a jewel of the cosmos, burn. He saw the Allfather, Odin, fight a fiery demon and a goddess of death. He saw the desperate exodus of a dying people. He saw the final confrontation with a purple titan, and the forging of this very axe in the heart of a dying star by a grieving, thunderous sun. He felt the sorrow, the rage, the hope. He felt Thor's pain and Odin's final, desperate gamble, Stormbreaker. Its name was a brand on his soul. It was not just a weapon. It was a key. A burden. A throne. It was the last will and testament of a dead kingdom, and its sole beneficiary was him. The sheer sensory and emotional overload was too much. The power coursing through him had no regulator, no control. His body, a frail human container, was reaching its absolute limit. His vision began to tunnel, the brilliant blue light fading to black at the edges. The symphony of the cosmos became a dull roar. The last thing he felt was the solid, reassuring weight of the axe in his hand. It felt right. Like a missing piece of himself he never knew he'd lost. Then, the world winked out. Izuku Midoriya collapsed onto the sand, unconscious. The mighty storm he had summoned vanished as quickly as it had appeared, the roiling clouds dissipating into the calm night sky as if they had been a dream. The wind died down. The rain stopped. Silence returned to Dagobah Beach, broken only by the gentle lapping of the waves. And there, in the center of a circle of strangely dry sand, lay a quirkless boy. Curled beside him, humming with a soft, protective blue light, lay the silent axe of a long-dead king. The search was over. Stormbreaker had found its heir. A dull, throbbing ache was the first herald of Izuku's return to consciousness. It began behind his eyes, a deep pressure that felt less like a headache and more like his skull had been used for cosmic bell-ringing practice. The second sensation was a profound, bone-deep exhaustion, the kind that came after a 3-day fever. His limbs felt like leaden weights, his muscles screaming in silent protest. The third was the smell. A bizarre, sharp perfume of ozone, brine, and wet sand clung to his clothes and hair, an olfactory signature of the impossible night. He groaned, the sound a dry rasp in his throat. His eyes fluttered open, greeted by the familiar, comforting sight of his ceiling. Not just any ceiling, his ceiling, with the faded glow-in-the-dark star stickers he'd put up when he was 6. He was in his bed. In his room. Safe. It was a dream, he thought, a wave of profound, bittersweet relief washing over him. A hallucination. A stress-induced fantasy brought on by the worst day of his life. The falling star, the rainbow light, the impossible weapon, It was all just his broken mind trying to give him the power he so desperately craved. Of course it was. He was Izuku Midoriya. Quirkless, unrealistic, pathetic. He pushed himself into a sitting position, his whole body protesting. A fine dusting of sand cascaded from his hair onto his All Might-themed pillowcase. His clothes, the same uniform he'd worn to school yesterday, were stiff with dried salt water. He ran a hand through his messy green locks, and his fingers came away gritty. The dream had been vivid. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his feet hitting the cool wood of the floor. He stretched, a wince twisting his features as his back protested with a series of sharp cracks. How had he gotten home? He remembered collapsing on the beach. He had a vague, hazy memory of staggering through the dark streets, leaning heavily on. His eyes scanned the room, a shrine to a dream now in ashes. The All Might posters, the Silver Age figurines in their pristine boxes, the limited edition bedspread. It was all a monument to his hero worship, and then his gaze landed on the wall opposite his bed, and his world stopped turning for the second time in less than 12 hours. Leaning against his prized, life-size poster of a smiling All Might was the axe. It wasn't a dream. It was real. It was here. In his room. It was huge, far larger than he remembered, the top of its gnarled handle reaching nearly to his shoulder. The dark, stardusted metal of its head seemed to absorb the gentle morning light pouring through his window, making the space around it appear darker, heavier. The intricate runes on the hammerhead were inert, but they pulsed with a latent energy that he could feel in the air, a low-frequency hum that vibrated in his teeth. It was an artifact of myth and legend, a thing of terrifying, cosmic beauty, standing casually amidst the cheerful, primary-colored merchandise of modern heroism. The juxtaposition was so jarring it made him feel dizzy. For a long moment, Izuku could only stare, his mind a complete and utter blank. He tried to process it, to fit this impossible object into the logical framework of his world. Was it some kind of advanced support item? A forgotten piece of military technology? But no, his analytical brain, even in its shocked state, knew that was wrong. The living wood of the handle, the impossible density of the metal, the feeling of ancient power rolling off it in waves. This was not a product of human hands. A frantic, panicked energy seized him. He had to hide it. His mom couldn't see this. How would he even begin to explain? "Oh, hi Mom, I found a mythical battle axe from outer space on the beach last night. Can I keep it?" He scrambled across the room, his heart hammering against his ribs. He grabbed the handle, his small hands barely wrapping around the thick, root-like wood. He braced himself, bent his knees like he'd seen heroes do when lifting heavy objects, and pulled. Nothing happened. The axe didn't budge. It was as if it were bolted to the floor. No, it was worse than that. It felt as if it were an extension of the planet itself, as if he were trying to lift the continent of Asia. Izuku grunted, putting his entire scrawny body into the effort. His muscles screamed, his tendons felt like they were about to snap, and sweat beaded on his forehead. The axe remained perfectly, mockingly still. It didn't even tremble. A flicker of doubt entered his mind. Had he imagined lifting it last night? Had the storm, the lightning, all of it, just been a fever dream, and this was just some impossibly heavy sculpture he'd found? Frustration warred with his panic. "Come on!" he grunted, giving one last, desperate heave. His feet slipped on the wooden floor, and he stumbled backward, landing hard on his rear. He stared at the weapon, breathing heavily, a sense of familiar helplessness creeping back in. Of course he couldn't lift it. It was another thing in a long line of things he wasn't strong enough for. He sat there, defeated, and just looked at it. The panic subsided, replaced by the same strange pull he'd felt on the beach. The connection. He wasn't trying to steal it, or just move it. He wanted to hold it. He remembered the feeling of it in his hand, the glorious, terrifying surge of power. It had felt right. Complete. He closed his eyes, focusing on that memory. He imagined the texture of the wooden handle, the perfect, heavy balance of the weapon. He thought of the whispers, the feelings of duty and protection. He didn't just want to move it, he wanted it in his hand. Here. Now. A low hum started, the same sound he'd heard on the beach. The air in his room grew thick and heavy with static. The hair on his arms stood on end. He opened his eyes just in time to see the runes on the axe head flare with a soft, internal blue light. With a sound like a small thunderclap and a violent displacement of air, the axe shot across the room. Izuku yelped, throwing his hands up in a panicked defensive gesture, but it wasn't an attack. The axe stopped dead, its hammerhead hovering a mere inch from his nose, and then settled gently, perfectly, into his waiting right hand. The moment his fingers closed around the handle, the sensation returned. The impossible weight vanished. It felt perfectly balanced, an extension of his own arm. The low hum of power flowed from the axe into him, a warm, tingling current that chased away his exhaustion and made him feel more alive than he ever had before. He stared, dumbfounded, at the weapon in his hand. One moment, it was an immovable object. The next, it was a weightless part of him. It wasn't about physical strength. It was about something else. The word echoed in his mind, a memory from the visions, worthy. A knock on his bedroom door made him jump so violently he nearly dropped the axe. Izuku? Are you awake, sweetie? I heard a loud noise. It was his mom. Pure, unadulterated panic flooded his system. Yeah? Just a second, Mom. He squeaked, his voice cracking. He looked wildly around the room, the massive, glowing axe still in his hand. Hide it! Hide it! He willed it, with every fiber of his being, to be under his bed. Nothing happened. He tried to shove it under, but it was too big. The head clanged loudly against the metal bed frame. Izuku? Is everything all right? Inko called, her voice laced with concern. He could hear her hand on the doorknob. Fine. Everything's fine. He yelled, his mind racing. He did the only thing he could think of. He dove into his closet, pulling the axe in with him, and shut the door just as his bedroom door creaked open. He held his breath, hidden amongst his spare school uniforms and a collection of old All Might hoodies. Izuku? Inko's gentle voice filled the room. He heard her footsteps. Honey, you were out so late. I was worried sick. You came in and went straight to bed, your clothes are all sandy. He heard the rustle of his comforter. And what was that smell? Like after a lightning storm. Izuku pressed himself against the back wall of the closet. The cold metal of the axe had a solid reality against his spine. The blue glow had faded, but the power still thrummed in his hand. He felt a pang of guilt so sharp it was like a physical blow. He was hiding from his mom, lying to her. He had always told her everything. But how could he tell her this? How could he add this insane, impossible burden to her already worried mind? I just fell out of bed, Mom. He lied, his voice muffled by the closet door. I'm okay. Just clumsy. There was a long pause. All right, sweetie, she said finally, though her voice was thick with skepticism. Well, I've made breakfast. Please get changed and come out soon. I will. Thanks, Mom. He heard her sigh softly, and then the gentle click of his bedroom door closing. He waited another full minute, his heart pounding, before slowly cracking open the closet door. The room was empty. He was safe, for now. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding and looked down at the axe. This secret was a heavy one. A kingdom's weight. Later that day, after a tense and largely silent breakfast where he avoided his mother's worried gazes, Izuku barricaded himself in his room. He told her he had to study for the upcoming UA entrance exams, which wasn't entirely a lie. But his subject matter wasn't math or literature. He sat at his desk, the axe, which he now knew, with a bone-deep certainty, was called Stormbreaker, leaning against his chair. The name had come to him like a half-forgotten song, a whisper from the torrent of memories that had flooded him on the beach. He opened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He didn't start with physics or engineering. His instincts told him this was older. He started with mythology. Search, Norse mythology. Battle axe. Lightning. The results flooded his screen. He clicked through articles, academic papers, and crackpot theory websites. He read about Thor, the god of thunder, and his legendary hammer, Mjolnir. He read about Odin, the Allfather, the king of Asgard who sacrificed his eye for wisdom. He read about Yggdrasil, the World Tree, and the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that connected the realms. With every word he read, a chilling sense of recognition washed over him. The visions from the beach weren't random. The one-eyed king on a golden throne, Odin. The shattering rainbow bridge, the Bifrost. The fragments of memory that still echoed in his mind. The taste of mead in a great hall. The sight of 9 distinct realms hanging like fruit from the branches of an immense tree. The feeling of a cold wind on the peaks of Jotunheim. They weren't his. They were echoes. Memories trapped within Stormbreaker. Odin's memories. He felt a dizzying vertigo, the floor of his reality crumbling away. These weren't just stories. They were history. A history from another world, another realm, that had crash-landed in his life. He gripped the handle of Stormbreaker, which rested beside him. He focused, trying to tap into the power not with force, but with curiosity. He remembered the lightning he had summoned, the storm he had created. Could he do it again? He held out his left hand, palm up, and concentrated. He pictured a spark, a tiny flicker of the brilliant blue energy that had filled his vision. He tried to will it into existence, drawing on the thrumming power that was now a constant background hum in his senses. A tiny blue spark, no bigger than a firefly, fizzled into existence an inch above his palm. It hovered for a second, crackling with a miniature hiss, before winking out. Izuku gasped, staring at his hand. He'd done it. It was real. It was his. He tried again, pushing a little harder. This time, a larger spark, the size of his thumbnail, erupted with a sharp snap. It zapped his finger, sending a surprisingly painful jolt up his arm, and then vanished. Ow! He yelped, shaking his hand. Control. He had no control. He felt a sudden wave of dizziness, and the room tilted slightly. A dull ache throbbed in his temples. The power, even that tiny amount, had a cost. His body wasn't used to it. It was like trying to run a supercomputer's processor on a watch battery. His physical form was the bottleneck. He was a frail, unathletic teenager trying to channel the power of a god king. He needed to be stronger. Not just for hero work in general, but to simply survive using this power. The weight of it all pressed down on him. This wasn't a quirk. Quirks were a part of human biology, a genetic evolution. They could be measured, catalogued, even erased by heroes like Aizawa. This was something else entirely. It was ancient, cosmic, and magical. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone with this secret. Who could he possibly tell? All Might had told him to be realistic. How could he go back to the man who crushed his dream and say, actually, I was chosen by a magical space axe to inherit the power of a dead alien king? He'd be sent to a psychiatric ward. His dream of being a hero like All Might, of inheriting one for all, was gone. That path was closed to him forever. But a new path, a stranger and more dangerous one, had opened. The goal was the same, to save people, to be a hero, but the journey would be completely different. He wouldn't be the next All Might. He would be the first, well, the first whatever he was. A new resolve, forged in the cosmic fire of the previous night, solidified in his chest. His despair was gone, burned away by lightning and replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating purpose. All Might had told him to be realistic. But reality had just been rewritten. He looked from his laptop screen, filled with drawings of Viking gods, to the real-life mythological weapon in his room. He had 10 months until the UA entrance exam. 10 months to learn to control a power that could summon storms. 10 months to forge his weak body into a vessel capable of containing it. He knew exactly where he had to start. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the mountains of garbage at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. It was the same time of day he had been here before, wallowing in his misery. The scene was the same, but the boy standing at its edge was not. Izuku stood on the clean sand near the entrance, Stormbreaker not in his hand, but strapped to his back. He had spent the afternoon modifying a ridiculously oversized guitar case he'd bought at a second-hand shop, padding it with foam and reinforcing the straps. It was clumsy and conspicuous, but it was the only way he could think of to carry the axe around without causing a citywide panic. He had returned to the site of his symbolic death and rebirth. The sand where he had collapsed was still strangely dry, and the air held a faint, lingering scent of ozone. This place was no longer a monument to his failure. It was his forge. His training ground. He unslung the case and carefully laid it on the sand. With a thought, Stormbreaker hummed and flew from the case into his hand. The familiar, weightless feeling settled over him, the power a comforting thrum under his skin. His new training regimen, devised by his own analytical mind, had two parts. First, the body. All Might had inadvertently given him the blueprint when he talked about preparing his own vessel for one for all. Izuku needed to build muscle, increase his stamina, and push his physical limits until his body could handle the backlash of the cosmic energy. He looked at the mountains of trash. The task seemed impossible. It had been impossible yesterday. Today, he had an advantage. He took a deep breath, planting his feet firmly in the sand. He held Stormbreaker in a two-handed grip, mimicking the stances he'd seen heroes take in countless videos. He focused not on lightning, not on some grand display of power, but on the air itself. The whispers in his mind had given him glimpses of Stormbreaker's abilities. It was a king's weapon, a tool to build and command as much as to destroy. It could control the weather. He focused on the air in front of a massive pile of plastic bottles and broken appliances. He willed the wind to move. He swung the axe in a wide, horizontal arc, letting out a determined yell. A gust of wind, stronger than a natural sea breeze, erupted from the axe's head. It wasn't a hurricane, not even a gale, but it was real. It was his. The gust slammed into the pile of trash, sending a cascade of plastic bottles tumbling down the side. Izuku grinned, a wide, genuine smile that had been absent from his face for what felt like an eternity. It was a small thing, but it was a start. He did it again. And again. Each swing was clumsy, the resulting gust of wind uncontrolled and chaotic. But with each attempt, he felt a flicker of understanding, a subtle shift in how he held the axe, how he focused his will. This was the second part of his training, control. He would clean this beach, just as he imagined All Might would have instructed him to. But he would do it his way. He would use his muscles, yes, hauling and lifting until they burned with exhaustion. But he would also use the power. He would learn to summon precise gusts of wind to separate plastic from metal. He would practice creating small, controlled electrical charges to fuse broken circuits, or weld pieces of scrap together for easier transport. He spent the next hour in a cycle of grueling physical labor and draining mental focus. He'd haul a refrigerator to the pickup pile, his muscles screaming, then spend 10 minutes trying to generate a consistent breeze, leaving him dizzy and panting. The physical toll and the energy backlash were immense. Several times he had to sit down, his head spinning, the world tinted with a blue haze. But he didn't stop. As twilight bled into true night, he stood before a rusted-out car half buried in the sand. It was too heavy to move conventionally. He had an idea, a dangerous and probably stupid one. He remembered the lightning from last night. Not the sky-shattering bolt, but the power that had flowed through him. He held Stormbreaker aloft, the URU head pointed at the sky. He closed his eyes and reached out with his senses, feeling for the static charge in the air, the humidity, the flow of the upper atmosphere. He didn't just command the storm, he asked for its help. He wasn't a god of thunder. He was its heir. Its partner. Please, he whispered, the words spoken to the sky, to the axe, to the memory of the one-eyed king. The air grew heavy. A low rumble echoed from far out over the ocean. A single, dark cloud began to form above the beach, drawn to him as if he were a magnetic pole. The runes on Stormbreaker began to glow, their light reflecting in Izuku's wide, determined eyes. He would be worthy. He would bear the weight of this kingdom. He would take this impossible, lonely power and use it to become the hero he was always meant to be. The journey would be agonizing, the secret a crushing burden, but for the first time since he was 4 years old, Izuku Midoriya looked to the future and saw not a void, but a sky waiting for its storm. The weeks that followed were a blur of aching muscles, cosmic whispers, and the constant, gnawing weight of a secret that felt heavier than the URU axe itself. Izuku Midoriya was living a strange and fractured existence. By day, he was the same as ever to the outside world, Aldera Junior High's resident quirkless Deku, quiet, observant, and perpetually lost in the pages of his hero analysis notebooks. He still took the notes, still muttered his theories, but the frantic desperation that had once fueled the habit had been replaced by a different kind of intensity. He wasn't just analyzing quirks anymore. He was analyzing power itself, trying to understand its application, its limits, its cost. But when the sun dipped below the horizon, another Izuku emerged. This one haunted the shores of Dagoba Beach, a solitary figure warring against a mountain of trash. The guitar case, a comically large and absurdly heavy burden, was his constant companion, a silent testament to the alien power hidden within. He had made progress. The scrawny, undefined limbs were slowly hardening into cords of lean, wiry muscle. He could now haul a washing machine chassis a full 50 meters without his lungs catching fire. His stamina had tripled. He was still far from a physical powerhouse, but he was no longer a fragile vessel on the verge of shattering. His control over Stormbreaker was growing, but it was the frustrating, incremental progress of a child learning to write. The controlled gusts of wind were now second nature, a tool he could use with surprising finesse to sift through debris. The lightning, however, remained a wild and dangerous beast. He could summon it, yes, but it was less a directed bolt and more a chaotic, convulsive discharge of raw energy. More than once, he had nearly electrocuted himself, leaving him with a mouthful of metallic taste and a body that twitched for an hour afterward. The power was a wild stallion, and he was just learning how to hold the reins. The whispers, the echoes of Odin's memories, were a constant companion. They offered no direct instruction, only feelings and fractured images. The pride of a king watching his city prosper, the sorrow of a father losing his sons, the cold resolve of a general on the eve of a war that would last 1,000 years. It was an education in responsibility on a scale he could barely comprehend. The axe wasn't just a weapon, it was the repository of a soul, the last remnant of a kingdom, and it had chosen him to be its steward. This secret life created a chasm between him and everyone else. At school, he felt like a spy, an alien wearing a human suit. The casual conversations about the latest hero fight, or a newly debuted sidekick felt trivial, like children discussing fairy tales when he was living in a myth. The chasm was deepest, and most fraught with tension, when it came to Katsuki Bakugo. Kaken had noticed the changes. He wasn't stupid. He saw the new definition in Izuku's arms, the way he no longer flinched when Bakugo postured, the quiet, unnerving stillness that had replaced his constant nervous fidgeting. And he especially noticed the guitar case. "What the hell are you hiding in there, Deku?" Bakugo had cornered him after school just the day before, his crimson eyes narrowed with suspicion. His cronies flanked him, their smirks wavering with uncertainty. Izuku had simply adjusted the heavy strap on his shoulder. "It's just a hobby, Kaken." "A hobby?" Bakugo scoffed, a series of small, angry pops crackling in his palm. "You've never had a hobby in your life besides licking heroes' boots. You're up to something. I can smell it. You think you're better than me now?" The old Izuku would have stammered, apologized, and probably burst into tears. The new Izuku simply met his gaze. "No," he said, his voice even. "I've just got things to do." He had walked away, leaving Bakugo standing there, speechless with a mixture of rage and genuine confusion. The explosive silence that followed was more unnerving than any of their usual confrontations. Izuku knew that Bakugo's suspicion was a powder keg with a dangerously short fuse. Today, walking home under the afternoon sun, the heavy guitar case digging into his shoulder, that confrontation was still fresh in his mind. He was so lost in thought, contemplating the ever-growing complexity of his life, that he almost didn't notice the distant sound of an explosion. But his senses were different now. Sharper. He not only heard the boom, he felt it, a faint tremor in the ground, a subtle ripple in the air's electromagnetic field. It was followed by the familiar, frantic chorus of sirens. His head snapped up, the hero analyst within him instantly taking over. The smoke was rising from a shopping district just a few blocks away. It was on his route home. Curiosity, a force as fundamental to him as gravity, pulled him forward. He quickened his pace, the heavy case thumping against his back. As he rounded a corner, he saw it, a crowd of onlookers pressed against a police barricade, their phones held aloft like a forest of digital torches. Beyond them, chaos reigned. An entire city block was in disarray. Fires raged from a blasted storefront, and down power lines spat angry blue sparks onto the asphalt. He pushed his way through the murmuring crowd, his shorter stature allowing him to slip through gaps. "What happened?" he asked the man beside him. "Some sludge villain," the man said, not taking his eyes off the scene. "Grab the kid. The heroes are here, but they can't seem to do anything." Izuku's heart sank. He finally reached the front of the crowd and saw the full, horrifying tableau. It was worse than he imagined. The villain, a monstrous, churning mass of green slime with desperate, manic eyes, had taken over the narrow alleyway, and trapped within its suffocating embrace, a familiar spiky blonde head was visible, thrashing wildly. Kakin. Explosions erupted from within the sludge, but they were muffled, ineffective, doing more damage to the surrounding buildings than to the villain itself. Bakugo was fighting. Of course he was fighting, with the furious, cornered animal desperation of someone who had never known true helplessness. But Izuku could see the terror in his eyes. The whites were wide, the pupils dilated with a primal fear that cut through all the layers of pride and arrogance. He was suffocating. The pro-heroes were at a standstill. Kamui Woods was evacuating civilians, his wood-based quirk useless against the fire. The towering empty lady couldn't fit into the narrow street. The powerful brawler Death Arms lunged forward, but his fist passed through the sludge with a disgusting squelch, finding no purchase. They were all there, all powerful, and all completely wrong for the situation. Their faces were masks of frustration and grim impotence. Then Izuku saw him. On the edge of the crowd, hidden in the press of bodies, was a skeletal, hollow-cheeked man. All Might. In his weakened form. He was clutching his side, his face a mask of agony and self-loathing. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second across the chaotic scene. In All Might's gaze, Izuku saw the same crushing helplessness he'd felt his entire life, the same horrible realization that he was powerless to help. The symbol of peace, the man who saved everyone with a smile, was on the sidelines. His time limit expired. He couldn't save the person right in front of him. No one was moving. The heroes were waiting for someone with the right quirk. The crowd was filming. Kakin was dying, and Izuku stood there, feeling the familiar, cold grip of terror. Every instinct, every ounce of self-preservation screamed at him to stay put. He was a teenager. This was a job for pros. He could get killed. It was a foolish, suicidal thought. But something else was happening. Inside the guitar case, Stormbreaker began to thrum. It was a low, resonant vibration that traveled up the strap and into his bones. It was the same hum he felt when he held it, but now it was insistent, urgent. The whispers in his mind, usually a chaotic jumble of ancient memories, focused into a single, thundering imperative that drowned out all fear, all reason, all doubt. Protect. The word was a physical blow. It was the will of the axe, the final command of its creator, the very reason for its existence. It was a king's duty to his people, a hero's promise to the innocent, and it resonated with the deepest, most fundamental part of Izuku Midoriya's own soul. His feet weren't his own. For the second time in his life, his body moved before his brain could protest. He wasn't running on reckless instinct alone this time. He was answering a call. He ducked under the police tape. "Hey! Kid! Get back here!" a hero yelled. The crowd gasped. The world seemed to slow down. He saw the shocked faces of the heroes, the widening eyes of All Might, and through the murky sludge, the stunned, disbelieving gaze of Bakugo. He didn't have a plan. He only had a purpose. Halfway across the street, in the no-man's land between the heroes and the monster, he shrugged the heavy guitar case off his shoulders. It hit the asphalt with a solid, heavy thud. He didn't have time to unzip it. He didn't need to. He raised his right hand, palm open, and focused all his will, all his fear, and all his desperate desire to save his friend into a single thought. "Now! I need you!" The response was instantaneous. The latch on the guitar case exploded outward. With a sound like a thunderclap ripping through a vacuum, the dark, magnificent form of Stormbreaker burst from its confinement. It wasn't a clumsy flight. It was a guided missile of mythic power. It rocketed across the remaining distance, the air crackling around it, and slapped perfectly into Izuku's outstretched hand. The gnarled wood of the handle felt like coming home. A collective, disbelieving silence fell over the entire street. The heroes stared, their jaws slack. The crowd lowered their phones. Even the sludge villain paused its suffocating assault, its huge eyes blinking in confusion at the quirkless-looking child who was now holding a weapon that radiated an aura of ancient, terrifying power. Izuku's heart was a drum solo against his ribs. The power of Stormbreaker surged into him, a familiar and terrifying torrent of energy. He could feel the ozone in the air from the downed power lines, the thick humidity from the fire hoses, the raw, kinetic energy of Bakugo's struggling explosions. The world was a tapestry of forces, and he was holding the needle. "What are you doing, you damn nerd?" Bakugo managed to choke out, his voice a strangled rasp. Izuku didn't answer. He didn't know how to fight, not really. He hadn't practiced combat stances or weapon katas. All his training had been in control and raw power, so he acted on instinct, the instinct of the axe and the instinct of his own analytical mind. He couldn't get close. The sludge would engulf him. A direct hit could kill both the villain and Kaken. He couldn't use lightning. It was too chaotic and would probably electrocute everyone in the vicinity, including himself. But he remembered his training on the beach. He remembered the wind and the feel of the atmosphere. He planted his feet, his worn red sneakers digging into the cracked pavement. He gripped Stormbreaker with both hands, the weapon feeling impossibly light, an extension of his own will. He wasn't aiming for the villain. He was aiming for the air in front of it. With a primal scream that was torn from the very depths of his soul, a cry of fear, frustration, and furious determination, he swung. It was not a graceful or skilled attack. It was a clumsy, desperate heave, putting his entire wiry frame into the motion. But as the Uru axe had sliced through the air, it didn't just move it. It commanded it. The effect was immediate and dramatic. A wave of intense cold emanated from the axe's path, a localized cold front that slammed into the superheated, humid air of the fire-ravaged alley. The laws of thermodynamics did the rest. The moisture in the air flash condensed. A powerful, concussive blast of wind, laced with a sudden, torrential downpour of rain, erupted from his swing. It wasn't a gentle gale, it was a focused tempest. The wind hammered into the sludge villain's semi-liquid form, physically pushing the viscous mass backward. The sudden deluge of cold water had an even greater effect, shocking the villain and making its body less cohesive, harder to control. It was enough. The sludge was blasted away from Bakugo's face. He got an opening, a precious, life-giving second. He took a huge, ragged gasp of air, his lungs burning, and then, with renewed vigor, he unleashed the most powerful explosion he could muster directly into the villain's core. The combination of the wind, the water, and the point-blank explosion was too much. The sludge villain's form destabilized, loosening its grip. The opening was there. A chance for rescue. Izuku stood panting, the axe feeling heavy for the first time, the backlash of the power making his vision swim. He had done it. He had created an opening. That was all the cue All Might needed, a blur of motion from the crowd. A voice, no longer weak but booming with righteous power, roared, "I really am pathetic." The skeletal man was gone, and in his place stood the colossal, smiling form of the symbol of peace. He had been moved, galvanized by the sight of the boy he had rejected performing a feat of greater heroism than any of the pros on the scene. The boy's spirit had shamed him into action, forcing him to push past his limits. "Thank you, my boy," All Might bellowed, his voice for Izuku's ears alone as he shot past. "I needed that." He reached the villain in 2 massive strides. He cocked back his fist. Detroit. Smash! The punch connected with the force of a meteor. The sludge villain was obliterated, splattered across the alley walls in harmless, dripping chunks. The sheer air pressure from the punch changed the weather, the clouds parting as if in deference to the number 1 hero. Silence. Then cheers. The crowd erupted. The crisis was over. All Might had saved the day. But as the dust settled and the rain he had summoned pattered to a stop, Izuku realized with a jolt of horror that every single eye was now on him. The heroes, the reporters who were now swarming the scene, the onlookers, even Bakugo, who was on his hands and knees coughing up slime, were all staring at the small boy holding the impossible axe. "Who is that kid?" a reporter shouted, shoving a microphone in his direction. "What's your name? What's your quirk? Is that a support item? That power, it controlled the weather." Izuku froze, a deer caught in the blinding headlights of the world's attention. The axe suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 tons. The whispers in his head were silent, the adrenaline was fading, leaving only a bone-deep terror. His secret was out. He had no explanation, no cover story. He clutched Stormbreaker to his chest like a shield, his knuckles white. The pro-heroes approached, their expressions a mixture of awe, suspicion, and the stern disapproval of professionals who had just been shown up by a child. Death Arms opened his mouth to begin what was sure to be a thorough scolding about vigilantism and reckless endangerment. But before he could say a word, a massive hand gently landed on Izuku's shoulder. He looked up into the smiling, shadowed face of All Might. The hero's presence was a physical shield, parting the sea of reporters and deflecting the glares of the other pros. "That's enough," All Might's voice boomed, though his smile was fixed. "The boy is in shock. He needs medical attention, not an interrogation." He leaned down, his voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper that only Izuku could hear. "Just come with me, my boy. We need to talk." With his arm firmly around Izuku's shoulders, the symbol of peace began to lead him away from the chaos, away from the flashing cameras and shouting questions. Izuku stumbled along, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and fear, the weight of a kingdom in his hand and the gaze of the entire world on his back. His old life was officially over. A new, far more complicated one was just beginning. The world was a dizzying, disorienting blur of motion and sound. All Might, in his full, towering glory, moved with a purpose that parted the chaotic sea of reporters and onlookers as if they were reeds in a river. Izuku was swept along in his wake, a small boat caught in the draft of a battleship. He was acutely aware of the stares, the pointing fingers, the frantic snapping of camera shutters capturing his image for the evening news. He clutched Stormbreaker to his chest, its cold GRU had a stark, heavy reality against his pounding heart. The guitar case lay abandoned on the street, a mundane casualty of a mythological event. All Might didn't stop until they had put several blocks between themselves and the scene. He ducked into a deserted side alley, the same one where he had first revealed his secret to Izuku, and the oppressive presence of the crowd finally vanished, replaced by the cool shadows of the tall buildings. The moment they were out of sight, All Might deflated. With a painful-sounding hiss of steam and a sudden, violent cough that spattered blood onto the grimy brick wall, the Colossus vanished. In his place stood the skeletal, hollow-cheeked form of Toshinori Yagi, looking even more frail and exhausted than before. He leaned heavily against the wall, his breath coming in ragged, wheezing gasps. "Pushing past my limit like that," he muttered, wiping his mouth with the back of a trembling hand. "So foolish." Izuku just stood there, his mind reeling. The whiplash of the last 10 minutes, from helpless bystander to mythical warrior to media spectacle, had left him speechless. He looked down at Stormbreaker, then back at the wasted form of his idol. The silence in the alley was thick with unspoken questions. Finally, Toshinori pushed himself off the wall, his sharp, intelligent eyes fixing on Izuku. The pity that had filled them on that rooftop a few weeks ago was gone, replaced by an expression of profound, bewildered awe. His gaze flickered from Izuku's face to the impossible weapon in his hands and back again. "All right, young Midoriya," Toshinori said, his voice quiet but intense. "No more games. No more secrets. You are going to tell me everything. Start from the beginning." "What is that?" Izuku's throat felt as dry as sandpaper. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. How could he possibly explain? Where would he even start? The truth was so ludicrous, so far beyond the realm of accepted reality, that saying it out loud felt like confessing to a madness. He expected to be laughed at, to be dismissed as a delusional child who had stumbled upon some advanced piece of technology he couldn't comprehend. But the look in Toshinori's eyes was not judgmental. It was patient. Demanding, yes, but also open. He had witnessed the impossible. He was ready to hear an impossible explanation. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Izuku began. He started with the night on the beach. He described the crushing weight of All Might's own words, the despair that had driven him to that trash-filled shore. He told him about the falling star that wasn't a star, the rainbow light, the celestial scream. His voice was a stammering, hesitant trickle at first, but as he relived the memory, the words began to flow more freely. He described the axe, half buried in the sand, humming with a silent, waiting power. He tried to explain the whispers, the flood of alien feelings, loneliness, duty, sacrifice. He recounted the visions of the one-eyed king, the shattering bridge, and the final, desperate enchantment. He sent it away, Izuku whispered, his eyes wide with the remembered awe. The king, Odin, he sent it to find someone. A successor. Someone worthy. Toshinori listened, his expression unreadable. He didn't interrupt. He didn't scoff. He simply absorbed the story, his sunken eyes never leaving Izuku's face, creating an island of quiet focus in the heart of the bustling city. Izuku explained how touching the axe had felt like being struck by lightning, how the storm had erupted from his command. He confessed that the power wasn't a quirk, that it felt ancient, magical, and that he had no idea how to control it. He told him about his secret training at the beach, the struggle to strengthen his body just to withstand the backlash, the constant fear of being discovered. I didn't know what else to do, Izuku finished, his voice cracking with the strain of his confession. He finally looked up from the ground, bracing himself for the disbelief, for the gentle suggestion that he needed to see a doctor. I still want to be a hero. More than anything. This is my only chance, but it's not a quirk. I'm still quirkless. He trailed off, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his own incredible story. He felt foolish, childish. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Toshinori was quiet for a long time, his gaze distant. He looked at the setting sun, which cast long, distorted shadows down the alleyway. He looked at his own skeletal hands, then back at the boy and the cosmic weapon he wielded. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, heavy with a significance that made the air tremble. Odin. Asgard. Stormbreaker, he mused, testing the words on his tongue as if they were foreign delicacies. In all my years as a hero, in all the strange and inexplicable things I have seen, I have never heard a tale so fantastic. Izuku's heart sank. Here it comes. And yet, Toshinori continued, his eyes locking onto Izuku's with a newfound fire, I believe every single word. Izuku's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. You do? My boy, I just watched you, a child who a few weeks ago I judged to be powerless, summon a localized storm with a swing of that axe to save the life of another. I saw the lightning in your eyes. I felt the power rolling off that weapon. Laughter and disbelief are luxuries I cannot afford. I deal in what is real, and what I saw today was very, very real. He took a step closer, his expression shifting from awe to a deep, profound remorse. Young Midoriya. Izuku. I was wrong. What I said to you on that rooftop, it was the tired, cynical judgment of a broken man. I let my own limitations blind me to the truth. I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. He gestured to the axe, and then to Izuku's chest. But I was mistaken. It is not the quirk that makes the hero. It is the spirit. And yours is the brightest, most unflinching I have ever had the privilege to witness. You ran into danger, just as you did before, but this time you had the power to back up your courage. That weapon. He paused, shaking his head in wonder. It didn't choose a quirk. It didn't seek out the strongest or the fastest. It crossed the universe to find a true hero. It chose you. The validation, the sheer, unadulterated acceptance in those words, was a balm on a wound Izuku hadn't realized was still so raw. A fresh wave of tears welled in his eyes, but these weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief, of a burden finally shared. Toshinori's face grew serious, his gaze hardening with a familiar heroic resolve. But this changes things. Drastically. This power you hold, it is not one for all. It is something else, something wild, unknown, and perhaps far more dangerous. You have the heart of a hero, but you lack the training, the control, the experience. Running into that alley was incredibly brave, but it was also incredibly reckless. You could have been killed. You could have hurt someone. He straightened up, and for a moment, Izuku could see the shadow of all might in his posture, the unwavering strength of the symbol of peace. I made you a promise on that rooftop, Toshinori said, his voice ringing with renewed purpose. I told you I couldn't give you my power. And I can't. But I can give you something else. My knowledge, my experience, my mentorship. He extended a hand, not as All Might, but as Toshinori Yagi. Young Midoriya, you are no longer just a fan, and I am no longer just your idol. From this day forward, I will be your teacher. I will train you. I will help you harness this incredible, terrifying power. I will teach you strategy, rescue protocols, public relations, everything you need to know to not just wield that axe, but to become a true hero. We will work together, and we will get you into UA High. What do you say? Izuku stared at the outstretched hand, his mind struggling to catch up. This wasn't the path he had dreamed of. He wasn't going to be the ninth holder of One for All. He wouldn't be the next All Might, but this was something real. A partnership. A new kind of mentorship, forged not from a shared power, but from a shared spirit. All Might, his hero, believed in him, not in his potential to carry a torch, but in his own inherent worth. With a watery, choked sob, Izuku reached out and took Toshinori's hand. His grip was surprisingly firm. Yes, he whispered, the word thick with emotion. Yes, All Might. Thank you? Thank you? A genuine, unforced smile spread across Toshinori's face, reaching his eyes for the first time. Good. Then our work begins now. First lesson, discretion. We need to get that thing out of sight before another news helicopter spots us. The weeks that followed transformed into a grueling, exhilarating, and utterly secret crucible. The dynamic of Izuku's training shifted dramatically. He was no longer working alone, guided by instinct and myth. He had a mentor, and not just any mentor, but the greatest hero the world had ever known. Their new training ground was still the Goba Municipal Beach Park, but their sessions were now held in the pre-dawn hours, when the world was shrouded in gray mist and the only witnesses were the gulls. Toshinori, in his weakened form, would arrive bundled in a heavy coat and hat, looking like just another frail old man out for an early walk. But his mind, his strategic genius, was as sharp as ever. Your foundation is everything, my boy. Toshinori would bark, his voice a hoarse echo of All Might's boom as Izuku struggled to drag a half-submerged fishing trawler onto the shore with thick ropes. Your power comes from that axe, but the energy flows through you. If the conduit is weak, it will crack under the strain. Your body must become a fortress. The American dream plan that Toshinori had originally designed for a prospective One for All user was adapted. The focus was less on explosive power and more on endurance and core stability. Izuku's days became a relentless cycle of hauling, lifting, running, and collapsing in a heap on the sand, his muscles burning with the clean fire of progress. But the physical training was only half of their work. The other half was focused on the storm within. Control, young Midoriya. Control. Toshinori shouted from a safe distance as Izuku stood on a pile of debris, Stormbreaker held aloft. The power feels limitless, I know, but you are not. Every bolt of lightning you summon, every gust of wind, it takes a toll. You must learn to be efficient. A hero does not win by overwhelming his opponent. He wins by outthinking them. Use the minimum amount of power necessary to achieve your goal. Under Toshinori's watchful eye, Izuku's clumsy experiments transformed into structured exercises. He stopped trying to summon massive bolts of lightning from the sky. Instead, he started smaller. The task is to short-circuit the alternator in that engine block, Toshinori would instruct, pointing to a rusted-out car 20 yards away. Not to blow up the whole car. Focus. Feel the electricity in the air, in your own body. Don't throw the lightning. Guide it. Let it flow from you, through the axe, to the target. Izuku would stand for long minutes, his eyes closed, sweat beading on his brow. He would extend Stormbreaker, feeling for the subtle connection between himself and the target. His first attempts were failures. One bolt went wide and blasted a crater in the sand. Another was too weak and fizzled out halfway. A third was too strong and melted half the engine block into a slag heap. Again. Tashinori would command, never losing patience. Slowly, painstakingly, Izuku began to learn. He discovered that the power responded not to brute force, but to clarity of intent. When he simply thought lightning, the result was chaos. But when he visualized the entire path of the electricity, from his heart, down his arm, through the uru of the axe, arcing through the air, and into a single, specific wire inside the alternator, the result was a sharp, precise snap and a puff of smoke from the target. He learned to use the wind to create small, controlled vortexes to lift and sort piles of lighter trash, separating plastic from paper with a surgeon's precision. He discovered that by striking the ground with the hammerhead of Stormbreaker, he could send focused seismic shocks through the earth, loosening deeply buried wreckage. With each small success, his confidence grew. He was no longer just a scared kid who had stumbled upon a cosmic artifact. He was learning to be its master. During their breaks, sitting on a cleaner section of the beach as the sun rose, Tashinori would impart the other lessons, the ones that had nothing to do with power. A hero's greatest weapon isn't his fists or his quirk, Tashinori said one morning, watching the orange sun climb over the horizon. It's his mind. You have a brilliant analytical mind, young Midoriya. Don't ever let your new power cause you to neglect it. Always assess the situation. Identify the threats, the environmental hazards, the number of civilians. Your first priority is never to defeat the villain, it is to ensure the safety of the innocent. He taught Izuku about the legal frameworks of heroism, the importance of minimizing property damage, the art of a reassuring smile even in the face of terror. He grilled him on rescue scenarios, villain psychology, and the delicate dance of media relations. Your appearance with that axe has already made you a minor celebrity, a mystery, Tashinori warned. The media has dubbed you the Stormbringer. When you enter UA, you will be under a microscope. You need a cover story. We can't tell them the truth, not yet. The world is not ready for it. For now, we'll say it's a late-blooming quirk, one that allows you to summon and bond with a specific object. It's thin, but it's the best we have. Izuku absorbed it all, his mind a sponge. This was what he had dreamed of his entire life, not just being told he could be a hero, but being shown how. He and Tashinori built a bond, a comfortable rapport that went beyond teacher and student. Izuku saw the man behind the myth, the weary but unbreakable spirit of Tashinori Yagi. And Tashinori saw in Izuku not a successor to his power, but a successor to his ideals, a boy with a different kind of strength who was just as determined to carry the torch of heroism into the future. The day came when Izuku stood before the last, most massive pile of garbage on the beach. It had been nearly 10 months of grueling, relentless work. His body was transformed. He was still lean, but now he was corded with hard-earned muscle. His face had lost its round, childish softness, replaced by a sharper, more determined cast. He was no longer the boy who had cried on this beach. He was the boy who had conquered it. This is it, young Midoriya, Tashinori said, standing beside him. The final test. Clear it, Izuku nodded. He summoned Stormbreaker to his hand. The weight felt comfortable, familiar. He looked at the mountain of trash, a monument to a decade of neglect. He could haul it away, piece by piece. It would take him all day. But he had learned efficiency. He closed his eyes, taking a deep, centering breath. He didn't reach for the sky. He reached for the sea. He felt the immense, rhythmic power of the tide, the push and pull of the moon. Stormbreaker was a tool for a king, and a king commanded the elements. He swung the axe, not with force, but with a gentle, guiding motion, as if conducting an orchestra. He didn't create a wave. He asked for one. He tapped into the ocean's natural rhythm and amplified it, focusing its energy. The sea responded. A single, massive, perfectly formed wave rose from the calm water. It wasn't a destructive tsunami, but a powerful, controlled surge. It rolled onto the shore, engulfed the final pile of garbage, and as it receded, it pulled every last piece of scrap metal and plastic out into the bay with it, leaving behind a pristine, clean stretch of sand. Izuku stood panting slightly, the effort more one of focus than of raw power. He looked at the beach. It was clean. For the first time in years, Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was beautiful. Tashinori was silent for a long moment, a look of utter pride on his face. He walked over and placed a heavy hand on Izuku's shoulder. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are ready." Izuku looked up at his mentor, then at the rising sun painting the clean sand in shades of gold and rose. He felt a surge of power in his chest that had nothing to do with the axe in his hand. It was the strength he had built with his own two hands, the confidence he had earned through sweat and perseverance. He was not just the heir to Odin's Stormbreaker. He was Izuku Midoriya, and he was going to be a hero. The gates of Uei loomed before Izuku like the entrance to a pantheon. They were massive, a testament to the grand scale of the institution and the dreams it housed. For 10 years he had stood on the other side of these gates as a spectator, a fan, a hopeful boy with an impossible dream. Today, he was walking through them as an applicant, a contender. The air itself seemed to thrum with a unique energy, a potent mixture of ambition, anxiety, and the latent power of 1,000 quirks all gathered in one place. He clutched the strap of his reinforced guitar case, the weight of Stormbreaker a solid, reassuring presence on his back. It was his secret, his power, his burden, and today, it was his key. He had followed Tashinori's advice, arriving in his standard junior high uniform to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. The strategy failed spectacularly. A 10-foot-long, ridiculously oversized guitar case tends to stand out, even in a crowd of teenagers with horns, tails, and sparking skin. Whispers followed him like a tailwind. "Who's that kid? Is that his quirk? Must be some kind of strength enhancer to carry that thing. Look at his arms. He's pretty ripped for a middle schooler. Maybe it's just a guitar. A really, really big guitar." Izuku kept his head down, his cheeks burning. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. For his entire life, his defining characteristic had been his lack of one. He was invisible, the quirkless kid, the background character. Now, he was a spectacle. This was the first taste of the life Tashinori had warned him about, the life under the microscope. He tightened his grip on the strap and pushed forward, focusing on the path ahead. Just as he was about to take another step, he stumbled, his foot catching on an uneven paving stone. He pitched forward, a clumsy, graceless fall that seemed inevitable. The massive case on his back added momentum, threatening to send him sprawling face first onto the hallowed grounds of his dream school. Pathetic, he thought, a flash of the old Izuku's surfacing. Can't even walk straight. But he didn't hit the ground. He stopped, suspended in midair, a strange, weightless sensation enveloping him. "Whoa there! Are you okay?" a bright, cheerful voice asked. He was gently righted, his feet settling back on the pavement. He turned to see a girl with a round, friendly face, rosy cheeks, and big, expressive brown eyes. Her brown hair was cut into a cute, chin-length bob. Her fingertips were pressed together, and she had a slightly flustered but kind smile. "It's my quirk," she said, wiggling her fingers. "Zero gravity. Sorry for using it on you without asking, but it would be bad luck to trip right before the exam, right?" She touched her fingertips together, and a soft pink glow enveloped him for a second. Release. The weightless feeling vanished. Thank you," Izuku stammered, his face now a shade of crimson that would rival a fire truck. I wasn't watching where I was going. I'm so clumsy. No worries," she chirped. "That case looks super heavy." "I get it. I'm Ochako Uraraka, by the way." "It's nice to meet you. I'm Izuku Midoriya," he managed to get out. "Nice to meet you too, Uraraka-san. Well, Midoriya-kun, let's do our best in there," she said with a determined pump of her fist before heading towards the auditorium. Izuku stood frozen for a moment, the genuine warmth of her kindness a stark contrast to the suspicious whispers of the crowd. It was the first time someone his age, a fellow applicant, had spoken to him without a hint of pity or derision. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. Maybe he could find a place here after all. The written exam was a blur of complex equations and obscure historical facts, but Izuku's years of meticulous study paid off. He moved through the questions with a quiet confidence. The true test, however, lay in the auditorium, where the hero present Mike, a living sound system in a leather jacket, was screaming the details of the practical exam. "Are you ready?" he screeched, the volume making the seats vibrate. Izuku, like everyone else, was given a pamphlet. The practical exam was a 10-minute mock battle in a massive, sprawling urban cityscape. Applicants would be divided into different battle centers to avoid them teaming up with friends. The goal was to score points by disabling robotic villains. There were 3 types: 1-pointers, 2-pointers, and 3-pointers, each with varying degrees of difficulty. A lanky, blue-haired boy with engines in his calves shot to his feet, his hand chopping the air with rigid precision. "Excuse me, sir. A question," he announced, his voice booming with formal intensity. "On the printout, there are 4 types of villains listed. If this is a misprint, it is a disgrace for Japan's top hero school." He then spun around, his sharp gaze landing squarely on Izuku. "And you, with the oversized luggage. You have been muttering and fidgeting this entire presentation. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave." All eyes turned to Izuku. He shrank in his seat, his face on fire. The muttering was a nervous habit he thought he mostly kicked, but the anxiety of the day had brought it roaring back. Present Mike just grinned. All right, examinee 7111. Thanks for the call, Ian. The 4th villain type is a 0-pointer. It's more of an obstacle, a gimmick. There's no point in fighting it, so I recommend you listeners just avoid it. That's all I got for you today. Go beyond. Plus ultra. As they were dismissed to their respective buses, the formal boy, whose name was Tenya Ida, approached Izuku and offered a stiff, formal apology for his outburst. Izuku accepted it with a flustered wave of his hands, his social anxiety warring with his newfound purpose. He was shepherded onto a bus bound for Battle Center B, his mind a whirlwind. Villain robots. Point values. This is it. The analytical part of his brain was already kicking into high gear. The robots were machines. That meant circuits, hydraulics, wiring. Toshinori had drilled him on this. Efficiency. Precision. Don't waste energy. He arrived at Battle Center B, and the scale of it took his breath away. It was a city, not a set, not a soundstage, but a fully realized urban environment with towering skyscrapers, multi-lane roads, and dense alleyways. It was designed to be a hero's playground and a villain's fortress. The other applicants were stretching, activating their quirks, a dazzling and intimidating display of power. A blond boy with a cocky smirk had a sparkling laser shooting from his navel. A girl with pink skin was creating some kind of corrosive acid between her palms. And then there was Izuku, with his ridiculous guitar case. He found a quiet corner and unzipped the bag, carefully pulling out Stormbreaker. The moment the URU metal hit the open air, the whispers began anew, this time laced with open disbelief and a hint of mockery. Is he serious? He's gonna fight robots with an axe? Maybe it's a super-powered axe. Like from a video game? Izuku ignored them. He took a deep breath, the familiar scent of ozone and ancient stone from the axe calming his frayed nerves. He rolled his shoulders, feeling the comfortable weight of the weapon in his hand. This wasn't just an axe. It was a part of him. You and me, he thought, giving the handle a reassuring squeeze. Let's show them what we can do, and stay art. Present Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. The massive gates in front of them slid open, revealing the empty city streets. For a second, everyone stood frozen, confused by the lack of a countdown. What's the matter? There are no countdowns in a real fight. Run! Run! The die is cast. The other applicants shot off like cannonballs, a mad dash of explosions, super speed, and leaping bodies. Izuku was left in the dust for a moment, his mind catching up. Right. Real fight. He broke into a sprint, his powerful leg muscles, forged on the sands of Dagobah, propelling him forward with surprising speed. He rounded the first corner, and came face to face with his first opponent. A one-pointer, a sleek, green machine on a single tread, its red optical sensor locking onto him. It raised a pair of machine gun arms. Izuku didn't hesitate. He wasn't a close combat fighter yet. Toshinori had been adamant about that. His skill was with the axe as a conduit, a ranged weapon. With a practiced motion honed over months of training, he reared back and threw Stormbreaker. The axe flew with the speed and accuracy of a guided missile, spinning end over end. It wasn't a throw born of muscle, but of will. He was connected to it, guiding its path. The URU blade sliced clean through the robot's torso, severing hydraulics and circuits with a single, devastating impact. The robot sparked, spasmed, and collapsed into a pile of scrap metal. Before it even hit the ground, Izuku held out his hand. Stormbreaker halted its momentum, reversed course, and flew back into his waiting grasp with a satisfying thwump. 1 point. A grin split his face. It worked. It actually worked. He sprinted deeper into the city. A pair of 2-pointers, bulkier machines with heavy cannon arms, cornered a girl with purple hair and headphone jacks hanging from her earlobes. They were closing in, their cannons charging up. "Look out!" Izuku shouted. He didn't have a clean throwing angle. "Efficiency," Tashinori's voice echoed in his head. He held Stormbreaker aloft, not to the sky, but pointing it directly at the two robots. He visualized the path, a forked chain of energy. With a grunt of effort, he unleashed a controlled burst of lightning. 2 brilliant blue tendrils of electricity erupted from the axe head. They weren't the chaotic bolts of his early training. They were focused, precise. Each tendril struck a robot directly in its optical sensor. The machine seized up, their internal systems fried, and toppled over like tin soldiers. The girl stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and gratitude, before running off in search of her own points. Izuku was a storm of steel and lightning. He was devastatingly effective, but it was clear to any observer that he was no polished hero. His movements were clumsy, his style chaotic. He would sprint down an avenue, hurl his axe to take out a 3-pointer a block away, and then have to duck and weave as 2-pointers closed in on his position while he waited for his weapon to return. He was a whirlwind of frantic energy, relying on raw power and quick thinking rather than skill or grace. He racked up points at an incredible rate, 20, 30, 45, but he was panting, sweating, the constant summoning and channeling of energy taking a visible toll. In a darkened observation room high above the battle centers, the faculty of UA High watched the exams on a bank of monitors. "This year's batch is impressive," the skeletal hero Vlad King commented, gesturing to a screen showing Bakugo blasting his way through a horde of robots. "Lots of powerful, combat-oriented quirks." "Indeed," chimed in the R-rated hero Midnight. "But raw power isn't everything. Look at this one." She pointed to a screen showing Tenya Ida systematically disabling robots with high-speed kicks, prioritizing the ones closest to other, more vulnerable examinees. Excellent situational awareness and heroic potential. Principal Nizu, a small, white-furred creature of indeterminate species, simply steepled his paws, a knowing glint in his black eyes. "All very promising. But Aizawa, you've been quiet. Anyone catch your eye?" Shota Aizawa, the perpetually exhausted-looking hero known as Eraserhead, grunted. He was staring intently at a single monitor, Izuku's. "That one," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Midoriya. His file says he's quirkless." The other teachers leaned in, murmuring in surprise. "Quirkless? That can't be right," Vlad King said. "Look at him. He's commanding lightning. And that axe, it returns to him on command. That has to be some form of telekinesis. His quirk registered as none on every official test since he was 4, Aizawa countered, never taking his eyes off the screen. And look at the energy readings." He tapped a button, and a spectral analysis appeared next to the video feed. "The energy signature he's putting out, it's not like any quirk I've ever seen. It's too chaotic. Too powerful. It's not biological. It's something else." Nizu's smile widened. "How very interesting." He took a sip of his tea. "Well, the exam isn't just about destroying villains, is it? It's about revealing the true nature of a hero. Let's see how they handle a real crisis." He reached forward and pressed a large, red button on the console. "Let's release the gimmick." Back in Battle Center B, the ground began to shake. A deep, groaning rumble echoed through the artificial city, the sound of 1,000 tons of metal in motion. The other applicants paused, their battles forgotten, as they looked around in confusion and fear. From behind a skyscraper at the far end of the city, something colossal began to rise. It was the 0-pointer, but calling it a robot was an insult to the word. It was a mobile skyscraper, a kaiju of chrome and steel that dwarfed the tallest buildings around it. Its head was a solid block of metal, its single red eye glowing with malevolent, unthinking purpose. Its massive arms could crush entire buildings. It moved forward on tank treads that tore up the asphalt as if it were wet paper. The message was clear: flee, and flee they did. The applicants, who moments before had been confident warriors, turned and ran. It's the zero-pointer! Someone screamed. No points! It's not worth it! Izuku stared up at the mechanical behemoth, a feeling of profound, primal dread washing over him. Its sheer scale was an act of psychological warfare. His lightning would be a bug zapper against it. His axe would be a toothpick. Tashinori's advice, present Mick's advice, and his own common sense all screamed the same thing: run away. He turned to join the retreat, his heart pounding. But then he heard a cry. Ow! Help! He whipped his head around. A short distance away, the kind girl from the entrance, Ochako Uraraka, was trapped. A stray shot from a three-pointer had blasted the side of a building, and a massive slab of concrete had pinned her leg to the ground. She was struggling, her face pale with pain and terror, directly in the path of the advancing zero-pointer. The giant robot raised its massive fist, preparing to bring it down and crush the entire section of the street. The world went silent. The fleeing students, the distant shouts of Present Mike, the groaning of the robot, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. All Izuku could see was a girl, a person in need, who was about to die. He saw her terrified brown eyes, and in that moment, he felt no fear for himself. He felt no hesitation. The whisper in his soul, the final command of a dying king, the fundamental principle of his own being, roared to life. Protect. He didn't think. He acted. He needed to get to her. Now. He needed to cross the 50 yards of rubble-strewn street in an instant. There was no time to run. He had never tried it before, not consciously. He had only felt it once, a flash of rainbow light in a moment of extreme duress. But the memory of that power, the key to it, was etched into the axe, into his very soul. It was a king's power, the power to travel between worlds. The power of the Bifrost. He focused all of his will, all of his desperation, all of his heroic instinct on a single, impossible command. Get me to her. The response was not a surge of lightning or a gust of wind. It was something far more profound. The air around Izuku warped, bending light like a heat haze. A torrent of brilliant, crystalline rainbow energy erupted from the ground at his feet, engulfing him in a column of impossible color. It wasn't hot or cold, it was pure energy, the sound of 1,000 shattering crystals filling the air. To the stunned onlookers who had paused in their flight, it was as if he simply vanished from his spot. A nanosecond later, the same column of rainbow light erupted in front of Uraraka, depositing a stunned but determined Izuku Midoriya onto the pavement between her and the descending fist of the zero-pointer. Midoriya-kun? She gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. He didn't have time to answer. He didn't have time to process what he had just done. The shadow of the giant fist was falling over them. It would all be for nothing if he couldn't stop it. He looked at the colossal robot, and he didn't see an obstacle. He saw a threat to an innocent person. And threats had to be eliminated. He let out a primal scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury and protective instinct. He channeled every ounce of power he had, not from the air, but from the very heart of Stormbreaker, the cosmic energy of the dying star in which it was forged. The axe in his hands began to glow, not with the familiar blue of lightning, but with a blinding, white-hot intensity. The runes on its surface burned like miniature suns. He spun on his heel, building momentum, and with a final, desperate roar, he hurled Stormbreaker not at the fist, but straight up at the zero-pointer's massive head. As the axe flew, he raised his empty hand and commanded the sky. Now, a bolt of lightning, thicker and more powerful than any he had ever summoned, tore from the heavens. But it didn't strike the robot. It struck the flying axe. Stormbreaker became a conduit, a cosmic lightning rod. The heavenly bolt supercharged the Uru metal, turning the weapon into a guided thunderbolt of cataclysmic power. It struck the zero-pointer's head with the force of an artillery shell. The result was an explosion of biblical proportions. A blinding flash of light, a deafening crack-kaboom that shattered every window for 3 blocks. The zero-pointer's head vaporized. Its body, deprived of its control unit, staggered for a moment, its single red eye flickering out, before it began to topple backward, away from Izuku and Uraraka, crashing into the buildings behind it with a ground-shaking cataclysm of screeching metal. Silence. The exam was over. A klaxon blared, signaling the end of the 10 minutes. In the observation room, the faculty was on its feet, their faces a mixture of stark terror and utter, jaw-dropping disbelief. Coffee mugs were overturned. Papers were scattered. Aizawa was gripping the edge of the console, his knuckles white, his quirk-erasing eyes wide and useless against a power that wasn't a quirk. Niza was just smiling, a wide, slightly terrifying grin on his face. Oh yes, he whispered to himself. He'll do nicely. Back in the arena, Izuku stood panting, his body trembling with the backlash. Using the Bifrost and then summoning that much power had drained him completely. The world was tilting, his vision tunneling to a single point of black. He saw Stormbreaker fall from the sky and clatter onto the pavement a few feet away. He saw Uraraka's safe, shocked face. He had done it. He had saved her. That was his last thought before his legs gave out and he collapsed, unconscious, onto the ruined street. He had earned 0 combat points for his final, heroic act. But the number of rescue points he had just accrued was about to shatter every record in the history of UA High.